UDL in Action podcast wishes to acknowledge First Nations peoples in Australia and across the world whose songlines traverse the globe. We pay respects to their elders past, present and emerging, whose cultural traditions inspire and continue to educate.
Hello, thank you for joining us for episode 7 of the UDL in Action podcast, where we explore inclusion, innovation, and the real-world impact of universal design for learning in classrooms of every kind. I'm your host, Rebecca Rosenberg. Each episode, we respond to real questions from real educators, teachers and leaders who are designing for learner variability and rethinking what inclusive practice can look like. To help answer the questions, I am joined by my wise and wonderful co-host, Rhonda Laswell, from Bartholomew Consolidated School Corporation in Indiana, someone who brings her extensive expertise and experience, insight, and hands-on opportunities to every episode. Rhonda, welcome back.
Thank you. It's good to see you.
Rhonda, today our questions focus on curriculum delivered differently. By that, I mean in Australia, we have what we term as distance education that is delivered virtually to students in the remotest parts of our continent and to those students who, for medical reasons, may not be able to attend or participate in traditional schooling. So our first question today comes from Sarah. Sarah is a dear friend and colleague who is a curriculum leader and teacher in a large school that delivers content via online platforms. Sarah asks, what might universal design for learning actually look like in an online classroom, and how can educators bring its principles to life in a virtual setting?
That's an excellent question, especially after what we all experienced in the world. I guess it's been 5 years now. If we weren't there, we were shoved there very quickly, right? So actually, universal design for learning absolutely applies in the online setting. And there are so many things that educators can do. But I think the first thing you have to acknowledge when you're looking at delivering instruction online or through even a device in the classroom, because the same goes if you have a learning management system and you're posting things and you're doing things from that perspective, is that technology zaps a huge amount of executive functioning. It really pulls down the cognitive load and impacts the executive functioning, which is that frontal part of the brain. So when you're in an online setting with students, it's really important to remember you still need to have checklists. You need to not have things busy on the screen. They need to be simple. They need to be organized. And then each lesson, you need to have everything in the same place. So the video always needs to be in this spot. And here's another piece. The goal needs to always be posted and made very clear to the students so that they know what the learning goal is for each activity and the unit or the lesson that you're doing. So that's really important. So, and you can also provide a lot of these things both online, and then if they have a printer at home and they need to see it physically, like a checklist, right? Or an article that they want to highlight, you need to make sure that you're being explicit about you could print this off, use a highlighter, and then respond and return your information. Or you could type it, or you could write on it, take a picture, write and upload it. So just remembering that all the things that you would do in the classroom can really be done to some degree. The other thing that's really important is the personal piece to that. And what I mean is recording yourself as the instructor, making sure that you're being very available and human, right? Approachable. And then also too, I think sometimes a thing that we can easily forget is that even in that domain, you need to have expectations, behavior expectations for what's appropriate. If you have students communicating, those need to be posted on the main page as well as throughout the lesson. So if you are doing something where you're asking students to speak or communicate together, you need to make sure what the behavior expectation is for that it's been taught, that it's been modeled by the instructor, and that it's also posted, because those same guidelines still apply in an online platform.
That's excellent. I love those strategies. So good, so practical. Can you give an example of a lesson that you had to do online and what was especially effective, and then how the students responded to you because of your specific teaching strategies?
Well, I think that anytime that you can begin by asking them a question and just letting them answer it, and it's not graded, it is not, something that you're going to determine right or wrong on, but just interest. And then I always like some sort of small video clip. Another thing that's really great that I love to use is cartoons. Just a really short cartoon to get them thinking or to demonstrate something is always really, really good. So starting at that place and making it really engaging at the onset is really, really important. And then giving them the option. You can either post to, say, a question or two that's on the group platform of the LMS, or you can message me directly. So again, allowing the students who want to be able to know their names attached to something, right, or not, I think is really, really important. And so giving them a little bit of that anonymity, as well. And then I go back to, again, allowing them to answer things maybe a couple different ways. And actually with technology, they can just record their answer, which is amazing, right? They can just say it. So I think with my lessons, sometimes I got the best responses from students when they actually were alone and they could record it, because guess what? Nobody was judging them. No one was seeing them raise their hand and answer. And so for some students who might have been quiet in the classroom, suddenly became alive when you were given those options. And then what was amazing was being able to incorporate some of those strategies back into my classroom. So what I learned was I had a few kiddos who really wanted to communicate and utilize their device, even when I was doing some direct instruction in the classroom. And so people say, well, they'll just misuse it or this or that. But you know what? They didn't. They appreciated being given that responsibility and that option. And they had expectations. Your device had to be up and it had to be on and it had to be ready to go in less than 5 minutes. And I had to be able to see your screen. It was that simple. And so they could respond and they could participate and they didn't have to feel the judgment of other students if that was something that bothered them. So I think my eyes were open both online, but also back in the classroom, and integrating those two together became really helpful just, for a few students, and that was okay.
That's great. That's great. Thank you so much. What a wonderful experience. I always find it interesting when kids or students are given the opportunity to have their own space, almost like have the stage to themselves.
Mm-hmm.
This person comes to life, and this knowledge that they have, they just want to share it, which is wonderful. I love that. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so Sarah's next question relates to the diversity of learners that engage in online learning platforms. For example, students who have intellectual disabilities that may be enrolled in Year 7 due to their age, but cognitively working at a Year 1 curriculum level. Sarah would like to know, how can we teach complex ideas like Confucianism in Year 7 to students at very different learning levels, even as low as prep, while keeping the learning inclusive using UDL?
Well, when we're looking at students who are at different levels cognitively, we have to absolutely meet them where they are. And while here in the US, we are required to make the curriculum accessible to them, we also have to be realistic about where their entry point is. And so, even though the goal may be here, right, and we haven't reached it yet, we may have a personal learning goal, right? Here we call them an individual learning plan. But anyway, what we can do then is look at where we want them to be, back the steps down, and then their entry point may be here, while another student's entry point may be here, and another student's entry point may be here. By mapping that out, you're actually allowing yourself to provide access to all the students in that broad spectrum. And if they never absolutely reach that in this particular year in school, that is okay. Because what we're looking at for students, and I think it's so easy to forget this, is we're looking at progress, right? We're not looking to see if they jumped a mile. We're looking to see if they made good, significant progress. And if they made progress, they were successful. And that is the most important piece. And while standards-based instruction is obviously so important because it gives us a roadmap, even for students who may be developing typically, they may, for whatever reason, not be at the exact same level with a math standard, a social studies standard, a science standard, or whatever that is. And that's why universal design for learning is so important, because we can provide different entry points for those students utilizing especially with learning management systems now, and online platforms, especially with AI and all the things that we have coming and that we're using in the classroom, is that a student can actually have a visual dictionary. Then they can click on a word, right? And it can be given to them in a definition. But then also too, I always stress picture dictionary. So a dictionary that provides the word and the picture and then the audio if that's available, and then an example. And that's no different than, a graphic organizer that we would use in language arts. So we always have to remember that when we're learning certain terms, like was mentioned in the question, that's vocabulary. And what we have to do is dissect that down, and we have to give them steps to that point. But again, I think sometimes as educators, we're way too hard on ourselves. And we're like, how on earth can I teach this kiddo right here, this over here? And the goal may be that, of course, that would always be our goal. But the real goal for a student who may not be on level with other students, or just cognitively may not be at the same place in time, is to look at progress. And that's something I cannot stress enough. We need to be kinder to them and ourselves with regard to those things. And we need to make sure that we're providing that. The other thing too that's really helpful is that all of that pre-teaching that we do for some kiddos, that may actually be the lesson for the other kiddos. And so we're not creating 30 different things and we don't have a 3-ring circus going, right? We're just mapping everything out and we're providing different entry points along the way.
That's great. That's great. Have you used journey mapping yourself to identify barriers for for specific students, and then use that information to then deliver your lesson, or plan for and then deliver your next lesson, particularly for those with that are at a lower academic level?
Absolutely. So I think it's really important to make sure that we're making their learning as personal as possible. And so when I have done that, I have given the option for them to give their own input and feedback. And whether it's through speaking or a communication device or pointing or pictures or drawing or whatever that is, I think that when we do that, we really have to engage the learner. It's not about just like looking at test scores or looking at some sort of analysis that was done maybe by a school psychologist. It's about engaging the student. And here's the other piece that's so important: interest. It is amazing to me how often we have students with intellectual disabilities and we don't know what their interests are. Like their favorite color might be pink. And if I put the content written in pink, I get a totally different experience with the student than if it's just typed or if it's in black and white. So I had a student who absolutely loved Hello Kitty and Target. And if I could incorporate any kind of content in with something about Hello Kitty or Target, that was like the bomb. So I think it's really key to not just look at what's handed to us. It is to really, really know and understand interests.
Excellent. It's about knowing your student and how they
Yes.
learn, and
Right.
the
And
vibe.
once you have that, you've got so much to build on. And is it a lot of work at the beginning of the school year or at the beginning of a term? Yes, because there's a lot to get to know. But once you've done that hard work, it's done, right? And then you just move from there forward.
That's great. That's awesome. Thank you. So, online learning platforms are becoming more popular for students at every level of education, including university and high school. One final question today comes from a principal of a large metropolitan primary school who offers online learning as part of their school's delivery options, especially for international students. Benjamin would like to know, how can teachers use feedback strategies grounded in universal design for learning to help all students understand their progress and feel supported in their learning journey?
Repeat the question for me one more time.
No problem. There's a lot in that.
Yes.
How can teachers use feedback strategies? That's those teachers using online, delivering online learning. How can teachers use feedback strategies grounded in universal design for learning to help all students understand their progress and feel supported in their learning journey?
Well, I'm thinking back to my days in the classroom, and I was always very explicit with students about grading, what grading looked like, and then just looking at how when I have this grade and this grade and I add them together and divide them by two, what my grade is. So I was very explicit with students, and that can also be a great math lesson. So I think whether you're in an online platform or you're in a classroom, I think that it's very important for students to regularly be able to see where they're at and what's going on. And I'll just give you an example. What I would do every Friday is print off with each student. It was real quick to do, report. It said what all their grades were for all of their assignments up to that point in the term. And if there were any missing assignments, they had the opportunity then to go find it, go to their locker, get in their folder, do whatever, and staple it to that, highlight it, and turn it back in for partial credit. Because I said, you know what? That is so important, right? That you learn to look at. It's not just in this aura somewhere in the world, like, oh, I've lost my paper. I mean, we forget sometimes, especially primary students, that their executive functioning skills have to be taught and they have to be encouraged and they have to be handled with respect, right? Because it's very easy at that age to feel stupid, especially about something that you don't completely understand. Like it's in the teacher's grade book, but I don't really understand how my grade is this right now. So for me, it is either providing some sort of report or it is having them keep track of. So whether it's on a graph and you're doing a math lesson with that, especially with primary students, that would be a really amazing thing to do, would just be able to use that as a math activity. But I think also too, with the feedback piece is not just giving a grade or a mark, but a response, right? Whether you record a little, we can do those little notes now back to students, especially if it's an online platform, you should have that option at different components to give that oral feedback to them. So I think they need that to understand. They really need to hear your voice because if they're not in the classroom getting that encouragement, they need both positive, right? But then they also need that critical and that mastery oriented feedback. And we don't just want that to be written or by a score. We want that to be personal. And you know, even personal notes can still be sent, right? We can write very personal notes that encourage students and that sort of thing. So I think teaching them how to track it and then making sure that our feedback is personal when necessary, right? And then giving them the opportunity also to fix it because that's huge too. That builds us up with the ability to have resilience. And I think that can also get lost in the online platform as well. It just becomes very black and white and mechanical. So I think anything you can do to make sure that you're providing that feedback, and then even just office hours. I know that sounds crazy because you're like, well, they're not in college. But no, having just a time when you're up in a Zoom and they can get on and ask questions, or mom and dad can pop on and ask questions. And then don't forget to do social things. And I know I'm going down the rabbit hole a little bit, but your feedback to them will be much more well received if you have a relationship, right? And so I know one year for our students who were all that chose online platform, we did um, they dressed up in costumes for Halloween, and they came in and did just some trick or treating and played some games. It was only an hour, but the ones that could come, and it gave them the opportunity to have that personal interaction, right? And that would be a great time too if you needed to meet with someone, you could. So I would say help them track it, help them understand it, and make sure you're making those personal touches.
That teacher-student relationship, I feel like
Always.
that's embedded throughout this podcast, the importance of knowing your student or getting to know your student, going out of your way to implement certain strategies or put in place certain platforms to get to know your student as an individual rather than the whole, like a whole group or a whole class.
Right, because not having the relationship is a barrier. And people don't realize that not having the relationship is a huge barrier.
Yes, it does. It is. I completely agree. Thank you, Rhonda. So we've had three questions this morning, which is my morning, which has been very insightful. Thank you once again for your wisdom and practical know-how, Rhonda. Before we wrap up, what's one takeaway you'd love our listeners to walk away with?
Well, I think that it really has been woven throughout the questions and the responses of this particular session, and that is being biologically respectful. And what I mean by that is of the whole student. So I know that we are physically, right, biologically respectful to our students. They're in a safe space, they're warm, they have room in the classroom and that sort of thing. But being biologically respectful means not just physically, but emotionally and socially, meeting them where they are, and then also intellectually or instructionally. And for all of the questions that were presented today, I think we can take away some simple truths about how we can do those things very small and little steps, but they are huge on the backside when the student experiences those. So that would be my biggest takeaway this time and my suggestion.
That's excellent. It's beautiful, actually. A big thank you to our listeners for your insightful questions, and thank you to
Yes.
all you leading this important work. If today's episode sparked ideas or reflections, we'd love to hear from you. You can email us at udl.in.action.podcast@gmail.com. And if you'd like the show notes or resources mentioned, just get in touch. Until next time, keep designing for possibility, not predictability. This has been the UDL in Action podcast. Subscribe, share, and keep the conversation going. We'll see you next time. Bye for now.
Toodaloo.